Serious. People who claim to have seen cryptids or other unknown creatures. What is your story? Story 1. I didn't see anything, but I had a weird experience out in the woods. I live near the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, and I hiked up there pretty much from May to October. A few years ago, I decided to hike this pretty strenuous trail that led to a huge rock slide. I parked and noticed I was the only person there. I had 2 dogs. I got them out and started up the trail. About a mile in, I came to this clearing that had a huge teepee-like structure in it. The trees were all woven together. I put down my walking stick and stopped to take pictures. It seemed weird but cool. I moved up the trail after taking pictures, and as soon as I walked past the tree structure, I immediately felt like I was being watched, and the woods went silent. It was so weird. No bugs, no birds, no small animal noises. I hiked by myself all the time, so I never got creeped out or too scared. I've seen bears. I'm sure there are cougars out there. I kept going up. The feeling got way more intense, and my dogs started to act weird. These were experienced trail dogs. They didn't usually get weird like that, staying super close to me, not making much noise. I realized that I left my walking stick down by the tree structure. Oh well, I didn't want to go back down to get it and back up. I got about a 1/4 of a mile so past the tree thing, and the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I was thinking, okay, rationally, it's probably a big cat. So I headed back down. The rational part of my brain told me to slow down. My flight response? Nope. Full speed down a 30 to 40 degree slope. I got down to the tree structure meadow and I looked down and my walking stick was gone. It was like it was nowhere to be seen. It was pretty distinct because it was made of aspen, and I'd picked it up somewhere else. There are no aspens in this part of the forest. I was terrified. I kept running. I felt like I was being chased, but I never saw anything. Never heard anything either. Yes, it could have been a big cat, but why did it only start after I passed the tree structure, and how did my stick go missing? I was near the parking lot before the feeling of being watched and chased left me. I will never, ever go back there. Still thinking about it gives me the creeps. Doesn't this girl know the trick to getting over the feeling of being watched is to go and look for what's watching you? It always works in horror movies. Story 2. So this happened to my son when he was younger. We lived in New Mexico at the time. My son, Cody, was riding along with his friends Drew and Alex. They were in Drew's truck and Drew was driving. It was night and they were heading to Drew's house. Drew lived in the country, so the road they were on was isolated and surrounded by a desert. In fact, that whole area is flat and mostly dirt. As they were driving along, they saw a man standing in the middle of the road. Drew slowed down and they all expected the guy to move off to the side. The guy didn't move. He just stood there. Drew slowed to a stop. The guy was standing just outside the light from the headlights. He was wearing jeans and some sort of long-sleeved shirt. They couldn't make out the features of the guy's face, but they could tell he was facing them. Nobody moved for a few seconds. The kids started to talk about going around him, but weren't sure if they should pass by this guy or turn around and go another way. Suddenly, the guy dropped on all fours and started running towards the truck. All the kids started screaming and Drew slammed the truck into reverse and floored it. Now they're going backward on this dark country road and this guy was chasing them on all fours. And he was keeping up with the truck. Drew went faster and finally, the guy dropped out of sight. Drew turned the truck around and they all came back to our house. I was in the living room. They came running in, slammed and locked the door and went tearing up on the stairs to Cody's room. I went up to see what was going on and this was when they told me the story. I've never seen them so pale and frightened. They were completely freaked out. This happened on a Friday night around 8 p.m. These were kids who would normally rather be anywhere except home on a weekend. That weekend they stayed at our place the whole time. They didn't go out at all and then only left because they had school on Monday. It took a month before they wanted to go out again at night. They would go anywhere during the day, but at night, they usually gathered at our house. After a little research, they all agreed that it was a skinwalker. Even to this day, if I bring up that night, Cody and his friends will get really quiet and look scared. It took a long time for them to get past it, and they still think that talking about it will make it come back. Story 3. When I was a missionary in Chile some years ago, I lived in a small town called Machala in a little house with a few other sister missionaries. The house seemed like it had started small, like one room small in maybe the 50s and been added to as the years went on. A hall here, a bathroom with plumbing there. The weird thing about this house was that around 3 a.m. every single night, the air would change. It felt like something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. The only way I've been able to verbalize it is spiritual nausea, like severe motion sickness, but not in my body, but rather in my heart. Then we would hear a child's running footsteps and laughter in the hall. None of us dared to leave our rooms in the wee hours of the morning because once you opened the door to the hall, that nauseous feeling multiplied tenfold. I would have chalked it up to stress dreams, but everyone experienced the same things. We thought it might be our imagination, so we decided not to tell the next group of missionaries about La Niña. They asked about it anyway after being awakened by her laughter. Other weird things happened at night too. One missionary felt thin, disembodied hands touching her back, experienced sleep paralysis and saw a tall, antlered figure staring at me in bed. Children's toys appeared in the hall. Some of our neighbors told us there was a nearby witch who didn't like us, and we occasionally found carcasses of animals in the yard. Whether it was her doing, a carbon monoxide problem, or an actual haunting, I have no idea. But it was distracting us from sleep enough to make us useless during the day. House blessings and prayers did nothing. Eventually, we were authorized to change apartments and the event stopped. I don't think whatever it was meant any real harm, but I do think it desperately wanted to be noticed. Story 4. Throughout my childhood, my father and I would embark on late-night walks, a routine spurred by his insomnia from shift work. Our neighborhood, deemed safe, had an urban feel, except for one road at the back lined with thick forest for about a mile and about a quarter deep, forming a circular path. These walks hold a special place in my heart, except for one, which turned out to be the last. Beside the road with a tree line, a long street light illuminated a small plot of land that was neglected and overgrown. It was our norm to stroll down this road, embracing the forest sounds, the absence of light, and the ease of circling back. One ordinary night while we were engrossed in conversation, my father suddenly halted. He pulled me close, covered my mouth, crouched with me, and pointed towards the illuminated plot roughly 100 yards away. Initially, I saw nothing and assumed he was joking, but just as I started to protest, I caught a sight of a very small humanoid figure, about 3 feet tall, scrawny with long limbs, emerging from the brush line of the plot. It cautiously surveyed its surroundings before signaling towards the brush. After a few seconds, 2 more small humanoid figures materialized. Following a brief discussion, all 3 dashed for the forest tree line. Once this unfolded, my father swiftly picked me up, threw me over his shoulder, and sprinted for our home, which was roughly half a mile away. Keep in mind my father, towering at 6'5" and weighed 220 pounds, showed no signs of slowing due to fear and adrenaline, while I at the time was roughly 120 pounds. After that night, late-night walks became a thing of the past. He installed 4 bright motion detection lights around our acre plot and brought home a dog. Every time I tried bringing it up, he refused to discuss it, making it clear he never wanted to. The memory of those figures still sends shivers down my spine. The image of the 3 huddled together remains vivid 15 years later. Isn't it eerie to know there are some mystical creatures that we aren't supposed to be able to see? Be careful. You'll never know what will happen to you if you follow them. Are you more afraid of mystical creatures? Or perhaps, like in Story 6, an eerie presence? Story 5. I was walking my dog and he started woofing and barking at the house across the street. I slowed down, trying to get a look at what he was seeing. There was this white-grayish boomerang-shaped thing flapping its wings, really slowly like a manta ray in the water but moving way too fast, circling our neighbor's house. It zoomed around the house, disappearing into the backyard and going back around the front maybe 5 times as I stood, staring at whatever it was. It was nighttime, but there was enough light to see that it didn't have any definable features. It was just an amorphous boomerang-shaped thing flying with one wing pointed towards the ground and one towards the sky, vertically. People say it was an owl, a bat, or another type of bird, but it didn't have feathers, defined edges, eyes, a head, or anything animalistic. It was just a diffuse, oblong, unnatural shape less than 100 feet away from me, moving way too fast for how slow its wings were flapping, and then it disappeared behind the house. To this day, I'm not sure what I saw or if I even truly saw it. The prospect of it being a vivid hallucination is almost as scary, but my dog saw it too. I swear in my mother's grave I saw something that night. Story 6. Backing up a bit, my fairly non-religious, definitely not spiritual mother claims to have been haunted for several decades. According to her, there's a ghost of an old man who stands next to her bed and silently screams. He's an intermittent visitor, vanishing for months at times and then showing up 3 or 4 times a week. She mentioned that he was around when I was a kid, but she never told me or my sister until we were grown and moved out to spare us from fear. Interestingly, he decided to tag along on a 300-mile move to another state, taking his sweet time like a lost dog at an interstate rest stop. My non-practicing Catholic stepdad used to scoff whenever she brought up the ghost. About 10 years ago, though, he switched gears and claimed he'd seen him too. Mom finds him annoying, often expressing her wish that the damn ghost would just let me sleep. Frank, my stepdad, just confirms that sometimes he wakes up to an old man leaning over the bed, silently screaming. I have this vivid memory of coming home from college, hanging out with old friends, having a few drinks, and waking up in the middle of the night needing to take a whiz. For a split second, as I swung out of bed, I saw a scrawny old man with dark brown hair, mouth wide open but no sound. I sprung out of bed right where he was standing, moving before my eyes even fully opened. He was gone, and I chalked it up to beer, grass, and the power of suggestion. I haven't spent many nights at my folks' house since and have never seen anything else. Sometimes, though, I wonder if the ghost finally decided after 19 years that I was old enough to haunt, only to get freaked out when I jumped through him with a midnight run to the loo. Story 7. I was walking to meet up with my friend in Connecticut, a place where, as far as I knew, there was nothing cryptic or unknown. It was around 11 p.m. and I was on my way to chill with my friend for a bit. As I approached his house, specifically the garage since I cut through the yard, I noticed my friend. There he was. I did our usual call, a ch-ch sound, and this thing just looked at me with his face. Every detail was the same, and with a full moon that night, I could see him very clearly. Getting closer, I called his name, but he, or it, gave no response. I figured he was being a freak and messing with me, so I continued on my way. I snapped at him, asking what the hell he was doing, and shortly after, he sent me a Snapchat picture of him at a bowling alley in a town about 30 minutes away. All this happened within 5 to 10 minutes of the sighting. I never saw anything like that again, but from that moment on, I wasn't much of a night person anymore. The eerie and dreadful feeling I had when I saw that thing stuck with me. I tend not to talk about the subject because it genuinely scares me. I still can't figure out what that thing was, but it mimicked the appearance of my friend. This experience seriously freaked me out, and to this day, I refuse to walk alone at night. This dude is lucky he only saw that. He would have probably been more terrified if it called out his name. Have you ever been so terrified of the dark that you can't wait until there's light? If not, like this video and subscribe to my channel to continue watching my terrifying videos. Story 8. My grandmother had a story from the late 50s. She was driving north in a paved 2-lane road, flanked by small trees and brush. Along for the ride were my great aunt and my uncle Ron, who was about 2 years old at the time, chilling in the back seat. They rounded a turn while climbing a series of switchbacks up a hill. Now this is from memory because she passed away about 7 years ago. I smelled it before we saw it, she recounted. As they approached, standing beside the road a couple of feet in a ditch, it was still taller than the car by a couple of feet. When her sister saw it, she grabbed my grandmother's arm and yelled, "Look out, Barbara, it's a bear!" She replied, "That ain't no bear." It stood there as they passed. A very large, hairy man with hair covering its face. Only its ears, lips, and eyelids lacked hair. What struck her as most peculiar was that it seemed to have no neck. Its head strangely sat upon its shoulders. While watching them, it turned its whole body and its hair was brown and matted like a stray dog. After they passed, my grandmother watched it in the rearview mirror. It stepped up out of the ditch on the side of the road, and in one large step it crossed the center line. In another step, it cleared the road into the ditch on the other side, and within 3 steps, it had covered 20 feet into the brush and trees, disappearing from sight. Throughout this encounter, her sister was holding her arm, crying and jabbering away like a mental patient. Both of them had even wet their seats. Meanwhile, Ron in the back seat slept through the whole thing. Story 9. One night, my husband and I were driving home, maybe from a friend's house, I don't remember exactly, taking some back roads. Suddenly, this creature darted out in front of our car and we had to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting it as it sprinted across the road and into the woods. Its body resembled a human running on all fours, but it was way too fast to be human. To top it off, its head was like a boar's, complete with tusks. We both saw the same thing and were rightfully freaked out about it. We later dubbed it Man-Bear-Pig. Story 10. I used to live in a very old farmhouse. One night I was fast asleep, but my sister, who worked on my uncle's dairy farm and had to start early, woke up around 3 a.m. As she walked past my room, she claimed to have heard very creepy, deep laughter. I'm used to sleeping in silence and I wasn't awake at that time. Later, when I told her about waking up with scratches down my back and random bruises on my leg, she brought up that creepy laughter incident. The scratches were usually 3 in a straight line from about the mid-shoulder blade to my hips. I had experienced instances of hearing footsteps in my room when it was just me and things falling off shelves seemingly on their own. There were also lots of creaking and scratching noises coming from the ceiling, but I thought it might be mice or bats in the attic. I've struggled with horrible insomnia throughout my life, often waking up with unexplained bruises and scratches. I used to think I did it to myself in my sleep. However, the strangest part is that everything stopped instantly when we moved 5 years ago. No more scratches, no more bruises, and my insomnia mysteriously disappeared. It's like the old farmhouse had its own eerie energy that decided to stick with me until we left. Not to scare anyone further, but the 3 scratches combined with everything else could mean it was a demon. Don't they do things in threes as a way to mock the Trinity? Story 11. I was on a motorcycle trip with my dad, somewhere between Idaho and Washington. We stopped at a rest stop to stretch our legs, and I decided to take a short walk through the woods at the edge of the rest stop. As I went a little farther than planned, I realized it was time to head back. That's when I stumbled upon a really old car in the trees, dating back to the 1930s. Given our shared interest in cars, I hurried back to tell my dad and we decided to venture in together. Finding it again was a challenge as it was deep in the woods. When we finally reached it, we sensed something was amiss. The 4 doors had been ripped off and were scattered in the dirt around the car. The entire interior was filled with sticks, forming what seemed like a nest. It wasn't just a few sticks, it was an entire construction held together with a mixture of mud and some kind of paste. The nest was also full of hair. The eerie feeling set in and we hightailed it out of there as fast as we could. Never went back. And to this day, I have no idea what could have made a nest like that inside an old car. Story 12. I grew up in the mountains. My parents owned a significant number of horses, often venturing on pack trips into the wilderness. My morning duty was to wrangle the horses, especially after letting them graze in the evenings. To make them easier to find, the horses wore cowbells, and sometimes they would roam far from the camp, requiring extensive searches. One morning, the horses had wandered quite a distance, and I found myself having trouble locating them. I hiked into an area with an old, dense forest, growing more frustrated as time passed. I couldn't return to camp without the horses. Then in the distance, I heard the bells. Perfect. I followed the sound to the edge of a winding creek. However, the bells suddenly stopped. Out of nowhere, I heard them again, in a different direction. I followed once more, thinking maybe the water had carried the sound. As I moved through the woods, the bells seemed to guide me, always leading me to a different edge of the creek, deeper and deeper into the woods. And then they stopped again. The bizarre sequence repeated 3 to 4 more times before I finally listened to my gut and decided to get out of there. The disturbing part was that when I returned to camp, the horses had mysteriously wandered in on their own. A rare occurrence, and all were accounted for. The Aboriginal trail hands shared the belief that it might have been a mischievous spirit attempting to lure me away until I was hopelessly lost. Story 13. When I was young, I spent a weekend at my grandparents' camp in the Adirondacks. I shared a room with my younger brother, and one morning, I woke up and glanced out the bedroom window right behind the headrest. The camp sat on the edge of the woods, a trail leading to the deeper, less inhabited part of the forest about 100 and 200 feet away. On that particular morning, a group of turkeys was wandering around the forest floor. Having grown up hunting with my dad, I was familiar with what turkeys looked like in the woods and their approximate size. However, right next to the turkeys, standing on a fallen tree, was an unusual sight. An entity that seemed like a mix of a hawk and a turkey, but with a humanoid shape. It stood about 6 to 8 feet tall with a massive wingspan. While my size estimates are based on my preteen perspective, the figure was noticeably larger and semi-humanoid compared to the turkeys. I never shared this experience with anyone. I simply woke up and went to eat breakfast, a bit too stunned to fully process what I had just witnessed. I watched it for a few minutes as it observed the turkeys wandering about. Story 14. When I was a wee one, my family and I went to a park near our house that boasted a quaint pond. A fascination with the small creatures inhabiting that aquatic realm knew no bounds. Water bugs, fish, algae, everything had my attention. I was squatting down, utterly enchanted by this miniature universe. Suddenly, out of the water emerged something green, snatching my little shoe and giving it a tug. In a blink, my foot slid forward into the water and it toppled backward onto my little behind. The mysterious entity was back in the water with a tiny splash, as quick as lightning. I blinked in disbelief, and promptly got up and ran to my mom, exclaiming, "Something grabbed my foot and tried to pull me into the water." My mother, in her attempt to console me, insisted that my foot had simply slipped in the muck. But deep down, I knew the truth. So here's a heads up for anyone living in Milwaukee. The pond in Cozy Park on 7th and Lincoln might just have a Grindylow lurking beneath its waters. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What's your experiences with aliens? Story 4 is out of this world. See you on that video.